Harrison Wise. I'm your host for FOAFing Around With. And today we are FOAFing around with Chris Heuer. He is the founder and managing director of Team Flow Institute. Chris, welcome to FOAFing Around With.
Awesome. Thank you so very much, Harrison. So good to be sitting with you finally on this.
Likewise. What we like to start is really just a little bit of background about yourself. So tell us a little bit about Chris Heuer.
There's a wonderful movie reference I make that I'm not going to make right now, but it's an interesting journey. Ever since I was young, I've kind of had this innate ability to figure things out. That curiosity of how does this work? How does it go? So every time I saw a product, a marketing program, something, I was trying to deconstruct it and get it in my mind. How might I do it? And then I realized I actually had another little gift in this whole thing, which was seeing how things could be instead of how they are, which ended up being great for innovation, ended up being great for fixing things and making transformations happen. But it's also a double-edged sword because you're almost invariably always disappointed. You want to see it a little bit better. This could be improved. This could improve this way. And anyways, as it turns out, I got an interdisciplinary degree, communications law, economics, and government. And instead of going into law and politics, I went into business. And ever since then, my first internet company that I started back in '94, I've done about 20 startups. Most of them have eventually failed. A couple of them I made a little bit of money on. And I'm living very happily with a lot of experience from some amazing people I've had a chance to work with.
Awesome. That's exciting. And, thank you for dating yourself and not being afraid of saying that you go back to the real early days of the internet and kind of owning that. What I like to ask other members of the FOAF group, what the FOAF are you? Or specifically, what kind of fractional CXO do you sort of most identify as?
Yeah, for most of my life, I've been a CEO, founder, or co-founder, and of course, I've had a couple of different roles. I did go to Deloitte for a little while to lead their social business practice, and and that whole thing's a whole different thing. But I also helped them launch Deloitte Digital globally. I did the global rollout of the Yammer network for Deloitte. That was fantastic. And I have, again, an interdisciplinary degree. I'm IT. I do a little bit of code, although I'm not a coder per se. I do product architecture, IT stuff. I've done all sorts of crazy projects. So I don't fit easily into a bucket. I'd really like to be called a CXO. But what I've done over the last couple of years during the pandemic is look more closely at implementing the future of work. We talked about it a lot back in 11, 13. As an IBM futurist on a new way to work. I was also one of the only futurists there, also involved in a new way to basically market. So I was involved in the marketing side and the collaboration, the external and the internal. But over the last couple of years, and the year and a half in particular, we've been developing the Team Flow Institute, which is really about applying best practices to how we work together, particularly in remote and distributed teams. And it's unfortunate that the COVID pandemic created a whole bunch of transformation inside 1 year. In fact, they say it's equivalent to 10 or 15 years worth of progress oftentimes. But the reality is we changed where we work, not how we work. All this stuff we talked about with social business and using social software to have that awareness, it turns out that all of that is a lot of the stuff that's the foundation for how we should be working remotely. And so I've been transforming that into practices and protocols, rituals, and systems to enable teams to work more effectively together. And ultimately, as a larger goal, we believe that by facilitating team flow, we can actually achieve real momentum. And not only momentum that keeps moving us forward and stops taking us off on side tangents and other stuff, which as an ADD person, I'm unfortunately guilty of occasionally. Also part of the reason why I learned the cost of all those tangents and how important it is to do what we can to move forward. But we believe that if a team is enrolled in a mutual ambition, that they can actually create self-generating momentum that doesn't require management by observability, that doesn't require a lot of prodding and poking, because the team members are so engaged, they're naturally moving forward to accomplish that common objective. So to answer the question at the end of the day, I've kind of moved from a CXO to a CHRO somewhat. But I also still have the technology, the marketing, and a lot of the other skills. So I'm able to really serve in a great advisory role also for CEOs and co-founders. We're even through my mentor bureau business. About a year and a half ago, I started doing co-founder coaching because I've had a number of co-founders over the years. They're not all the greatest relationships, but I'm still friends with the majority of them, and went through enough to be able to share my experiences so that others don't have to follow in the same mistakes that I did.
Yeah, no, that's great. And maybe elaborate a little bit more from your perspective within the context of what you're doing with Teamflow Institute, which sounds like it applies predominantly to more full-time hires or full-time teams. How would a fractional executive fit into what you're already doing for organizations that have remote teams?
Well, so it's an interesting question. Well, I guess I should put it like this. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I actually very clearly saw what was coming in the December of 19, after I'd come back from being an entrepreneur in residence down at a university in Australia, and was planning to actually go global and be a nomad, heading to Singapore, starting a new startup advisory service with a bunch of the colleagues I met through the Google Launchpad Accelerator, where I was also a lead mentor. And was going to go to Malaysia and Vietnam and back to Australia and Bali and all that fun stuff. And then, of course, the pandemic came. Right. So it was then that I realized that we really needed to do something to help people understand how to work better remotely. And so I launched something called Remotely Global, all remote. The 5 of us was really tough. We didn't have the learnings that we have now. And I ended up basically having to shut it down because I couldn't sustain it back then. Now, since we've been able to talk to a lot more people, get a lot more experience, and put it into practice, to where right now, of course, I'm working with David on some of these principles. It doesn't necessarily, I think that's a mistake, by the way, Harrison, if I may just put it that way. And I think you might agree with me at the end of this, that just because a person doesn't work under a legal contract doesn't mean they're part of a team. It doesn't mean that they're not part of the team.
Not part of the team, correct.
And actually, I had that experience when I was at a very large chip manufacturer from here in the US, helping to create their social media strategy back in the day. And I was a green badge, which meant contractor, and the employees were blue badges. And unfortunately, there was not necessarily discrimination of any kind, but there was a stigma to not being an employee. Employees were more valued. And so that was a very deep experience. And I've been inside other very large companies, like one of the very first handheld companies. I helped build their ecosystem out, and I was a contractor there. But I was very much a part of the team. And so I don't think that the nature of our legal relationship between any individual and the people they're working with defines the boundary of the relationship or makes them other, but instead an integral part. So, in fact, even beyond that, what I'm really envisioning is a new role that needs to be done to help with remote work, and particularly, as you probably experience yourself, remote meetings. They'll start, and then everyone rambles for 15 minutes connecting. Why? Because they didn't have any other connection time outside of it. Right. The meetings go over. You lose 3 to 4 people because they had to go take their kid to the doctor, or they had to, get to another meeting or whatever. Then all the decisions are made after the time the meeting ended, right? So we have to have better meeting hygiene. And of course, more importantly, we've got to do something to replace what's lost from in-person collaboration. It's something that there's always those extremes. The reality is somewhere in the middle. There is certainly something we lose by not being in front of each other, by not being able to literally share prana, to have breath and energy and the vibration and all that stuff. Yeah. And what happened was about a year and a half ago, I met Jamie Schwartz, my co-founder on this, and he had actually been working on a path similar to mine, and we just, meshed right away. But what we recognized was that his work and my work might just be the accelerants to create team flow and to be that replacement for that in-person energy that's lost. And it's such a simple thing. A lot of people go, well, we first talked about it as gratitude and glory. Now, I've been a big believer in gratitude protocols for some time, and how do we actually implement a sense of gratitude and positive psychology and the difference that it can create in our own individual states. And then, of course, how that transfers to other people. So what we hypothesized, basically, was that by implementing more of that positive psychology and the principles of gratitude, it allowed us to connect more. It allowed us to actually change our mindset and change the energy that we're creating between us. It allowed us to actually not just do it in a rote way. You know, there's some people who implement gratitude protocols where they force everyone to say something nice about that. That forces it. That's not it. It has to be meaningful. It has to be sincere. And so to come from that genuine place, how do we put in team facilitation in such a way that it encourages the natural sort to arise, that it puts people not getting upset at somebody who shows up with something that's not quite what they want, but is appreciative of what is there and starts thinking about how to make that better, how to correct that, and thinks a little more holistically, not just about that individual delivery or task, but thinks about the upskilling of the individual with whom we're working. And this really is a really important principle behind it that we discovered along the way about co-elevation. And I've always thought my entire life that if you're better off, I'm better off. Very simple principle, at least in my mind. And there's a bunch of us out here who believe the same thing. Not everyone, unfortunately, but a lot of us.
Right.
And if you bring in that, if I'm better off, you're better off, that ultimately is co-elevation. And Keith Ferrazzi, who I didn't know back then, but is another Deloitte consultant, ex-Deloitte consultant, he actually has written a book on this called Leading Without Authority that I highly recommend that explains more of it. So anyways, that ends up being part of it because co-elevation is sort of something that you have to have yourself before you can actually generate it with others to have it experienced. If you don't have that mindset going in, you're not looking for those opportunities. You're not approaching the interactions from that perspective. And then what I had done after leaving Deloitte was that I created a piece of software called Aligned, which whole point was to get teams and individuals aligned with one another so they could be more effective based on commitment management. And there's a whole bunch of stuff inside of there. But the end of it was recognizing work well done. And how do we recognize and appreciate that work? Not just the gratitude sides, but saying like, you know what, you did something amazing right there. And there's both that in real time sort of intervention or addition. And there's also the follow-up of after a meeting or wherever else, setting the note going, I really appreciate what you did. Your skill at blank, blank, blank is blowing me away because you've gotten so much better in the last couple of months. And because of the dynamics of remote and distributed work, where maybe the leader of the team is sitting poolside in Bali or wherever else they might be around the world, we don't have enough time for that small stuff, particularly when a lot of leaders and project managers today aren't just managing and leading, but they're contributing. So there's so much more work to be done. And in making the most of our limited time together, when we get 10 people on a Zoom, which probably shouldn't be happening anyways, we really need to make sure that we're focused and that we're getting things done, as I mentioned earlier. And if we're not there together, aligned on that mission, we're just not going to be able to be effective with it.
Point of view, what does a successful fractional hire look like? And sort of how do you measure that success or how do you properly integrate that fractional executive into an existing team structure so that way they can excel in their role or against the specific scope that they're given?
Well, this is one of the things why, as I've been working with a couple of, clients recently and over the past year, we spend a lot of time getting the basics right, making sure that the files that everyone is going to need are accessible, and trying to convert as much of the operations and interactions as possible to a sort of working out loud position, whether that's in Asana or Notion or some other, even in a Google Drive, just so that we're seeing what everyone's doing instead of all the work being tucked away inside of DMs and emails and everything else. So that's one bit of it that's really helpful, because if you bring someone in, they're able to go back and see, okay, you have this need, you have this project. I can see all the communications and decisions that led up to this sort of point.
Right.
And what really needed, though, and most people don't have time to do it, is an onboarding plan. What is it that we need done? How do we need to get the information that this person needs in their mind so that they can actually do the work that needs to be done in a very small amount of time. That means that we don't have time to spend 3 months getting to know everyone in the organization and the team that we might have to work with. Instead, we need transitory trust from the leaders who are bringing us in. What I mean by that is a very clear, we're bringing in this fractional executive or this fraction of a fractional executive, as we're positioning now, to be able to solve for this problem. And he or she is going to work with us in this way. And I need you to support him. So there's very simple things like that can be done. But it really is that combination of focus and clarity that we can create. And all of these things are kind of the fundamentals that lead to the ability to facilitate team flow as a peak state of high performance, of engagement and alignment. It requires clear communications, right? So being very specific as you can with what your needs are, what your situation is. The better the brief, the better the outcomes, I believe, on this. 100%. And of course, what it really comes down to with everyone is going to be a matter of fit. If you don't have that sort of, wow, there's something here and I value, it's not going to be working for you long term. We don't really, this is a tough one, and I'm still kind of dancing with it. But a lot of this work comes down to believing that fit of purpose in terms of the alignment of the purpose of the organization and the mission is actually more important than fit in skills in some instances, but not when it comes to fractional. Because fractional, what you're looking for is the experience. And what you're actually essentially buying for yourselves is the experience and capabilities of somebody who's been through it before, who can, in a small amount of time, pack in a huge impact that alters the direction and trajectory of your company. And so, the onboarding, it couldn't be anything more. But like as the need to facilitate better meetings remotely, it takes more prep work. And unfortunately, I don't see a lot of folks having the time to do that prep work, which is where I lead to this other idea of a new role for a team flow facilitator, who's sort of a coach, team leader, project manager, team co-leader, perhaps is a better way to say it, and also an AI pilot, the person who's actually going to be applying artificial intelligence technologies to our collaboration to actually streamline it, again, as we've talked about in the past, record the calls with one of these AI transcript services, and then be able to do something with it. I've been actually using these AI transcription services now for about 5 years because I will lose my train of thought. Imagine that. And it allows me to then just scroll back, go, oh, that's what I was talking about, and get right back into the flow of the conversation. Right. Well, since November and ChatGPT, all of that's changed. And we've been exploring how do we do more with that. And a couple of the services have it built in, but I'm now taking my transcripts over to Claude or GPT, and I'm able to interrogate the entire meeting to find key points, to understand, like, okay, Joe said he was going to do that thing. Let's get that description clear. So I don't need to actually be taking notes as I'm going on every little piece. I need to be structuring an outline, which takes a lot less cognitive energy as we're going through the meeting and allows me to be more present and allows us all to be more deeper in flow.
What are you most excited about for the second half of this year?
Well, I'm really excited to get FOAF out. It's something, the network agency or guild or whatever it's being called these days is something that I've been a fan of for a long time. I had my first interactive agency back in '94. We also did a local content site. But I did some pretty big corporate websites back then. We won some awards and all that. And I also got to the point where I had to deal with the elasticity of agency demand, where the demand dropped off and I still had too many people and had to let people go and go through all of that. And ultimately, trying to hit that break-even number with retaining top talent was very, very difficult. So I turned to the sort of network agency model that is a FOAFer sort of business some time ago. What I'm really excited about is the fact that the people that David has gotten together are just phenomenal. I'm just blown away every day by the people that I talk to and the people that I've had a chance to work with and their understanding and how a lot of the things they've had is now contributing to our institute and what we're trying to do to map what works best in which situations Well, they've already been there and done that with very large organizations, like standing up a 500, 600 person design department inside of a very large consultancy. Wow. And running it globally. And that was 15 years ago before we were even really talking remote, right? So the wealth of experience and what's going on, I'm excited to see what happens. And I'm really excited to be able to learn from everyone as we go on this journey together as fellow FOAFers.
Well, great. And any last minute thoughts, Chris? Anything we didn't cover that you'd like to share?
Oh man, there's so much, but let's keep it short. And if you're interested in learning more about what I'm doing on the side, it's teamflow.institute. We have a free community. My real goal is to actually build a community of practice that stands up Team Flow facilitators. So we're going to be doing a lot of free educational events. We're going to have, we have an online community already. We're going to be publishing a lot more. And more importantly, what we're identifying is the key research questions that still need to be answered. I guess the last bit that I didn't mention earlier is that while we kind of discovered Team Flow as our rubric or as our kind of North Star over the last year, shortly after that, we found a ton of academic research that actually proves it. And they have a different model using slightly different language, but it's the same ideas that I had back in 2013 with my Align software and everything we've been working towards since. And so I'm really excited to work further to advance that work, not only here, but globally, and have a chance to work with many other amazing people who have been doing some work around team flow, team science, and high performance teams. And so it's really going to be a great year ahead. And I'm just so happy to be sitting here right now.
Awesome. Likewise, it's been a great chat. I really enjoyed FOAFing around with you this morning, Chris. And thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, my friend.